Hi everyone, and welcome to this lecture on EMS leadership in developing countries. So before we get going, I just thought I'd put forward this disclaimer about that I may mention some companies or some products throughout this presentation. By no means am I representing them in any sales or marketing capacity at all. They're just groups or connections that we've had throughout this various process. So a little bit about me. My name is Duncan McConnell. I am the Foundational Program Director of the Griffith University Paramedicine degree. I'm also a Senior Lecturer at Griffith University. I work as the Clinical Director of the Mongolian EMS and Disaster Management Program. I work part-time within the Queensland Ambulance Service as a advanced care paramedic in low acuity care and extended scope of practice. I'm completing a PhD at the moment. And my research interests include simulation methodologies and international ambulance models in developed and developing countries, which sort of brings us to the topic of today's lecture, which was EMS leadership in developing countries. So where am I from? Well, I'm from Australia, a little island in the Southern Hemisphere. Some of you may have been here, some of you may not have been here. It's quite a lovely place. My map includes the state of Tasmania, which is our little island down the bottom. Often when you bring up a map of Australia, it forgets that little island, so always make sure that we include our little Tasmanian cousins down the bottom there. And our country is quite a unique one. We welcome our visitors in a very strange way. Pretty much most of our native animals will all have the ability to kill you in some way. And this sign is actually one taken from outside Cairns International Airport. So it's just warning people of crocodiles. But we've got a good local Australian that manages our croc population, and he keeps it under control for us. We've also got some lovely national icons. The good old Australian drop bear, nice fuzzy creature he is. And we've got our own Wolverine. Okay, so enough of our introduction about Australia and that kind of aspect. And let's move into what we're talking about today in relation to EMS leadership in developing countries. So in relation to that, what is leadership? Okay, how does it work? What are we doing? Okay, I mean, we're looking for a visionary. Are we looking for a change maker, a strategic thinker? We're looking at people that are good with people management, builds on success by listening to others and includes them in a collaborative manner. I mean, all of those things could add up to be a leader. And I think they play a vital key aspect in making this work. Overall, the short version, I find that leadership sort of encompasses these four key areas where you're empowering people, you're inspiring people, shared vision, and lead change. When all that comes together, you can make some pretty big things and really transform aspects of your organization into ways that you may not have even thought possible prior to attempting the challenge. And a good leader can really take you through that and inspire others to follow. So skills, good skills that a leader should have. So for me, I look at strategic thinking, develop a vision of where you want to be, planning and delivery, how we're going to achieve the vision, dealing with the challenges along the way, people management, finding the right people and motivating them towards your vision, that human factor. Change management, how do you recognize, respond, and manage those changes to match the visions and plans that you've got in mind? And then communication, that human touch, working on the best ways to communicate your vision to others and listening to their ideas, not working in isolation. Communication really is key of a good leader. And then persuasion and influence. I mean, encourage others to help you achieve your vision by demonstrating its advantages. Lead by example and help everything sort of prosper and come together as one. So trust as a leader, I mean, we could talk about lectures just on this on its own, but ultimately, trust must be earned, okay? And I think these are sort of the key aspects that I'm involving as part of my my presentation today. It's normally very interactive when I'm up on stage, but we're doing it via this virtual format. So hopefully we can sort of get some of the same exposure and experience. So developed countries, where are they? What are they? So as you can see from this map up here, you can see that our developed nations are covered there in yellow. And they're sort of the main aspects with well-developed economies, well-functioning healthcare systems, and just general things that we quite frankly take for granted in the countries that we live in today. But then if we move into our developing countries, then these are less established, poor economies, poor healthcare, struggling with poverty, and in a completely different place, and have much less opportunities than we would take for granted here. Okay, so security, food, livestock issues, government corruptions, famine, poverty, corruption, you name it. It's the challenges that they face we couldn't possibly imagine. You might see it on TV, but when you're actually in some of these nations and seeing what these people are going through, it really makes you take a step back and be very thankful for where we work today. So, if I was to sort of move into the areas of the two locations that I've been working on over the past 3 to 4 years, um, this is sort of part of sort of the natural engagement. But I put this picture up and sort of encourage you to caption this. Okay, absolutely lovely. So one of the first locations I'm going to speak about tonight is the Maldives. And this was one of the areas I've worked extensively with DFAT, the World Health Organization, and the Maldivian Ministry of Health. And initially, I was put there to help work through some hospital-based ambulance response, and then I've sort of migrated across into assisting them in their development of their national ambulance service. So it's absolutely beautiful place to visit, beautiful people, lovely food, and it's a place that you really find hard leaving when you've got to return home. So whereabouts are the Maldives? I mean, could anyone pinpoint them on a map? I mean, looking at this is the world map. Looking at it, could anyone clearly identify where they actually are? So if we zoom in just a little bit, you can see that they're located off the coast of Sri Lanka. It's about an hour's flight, an hour and a half flight from Sri Lanka. And you can see the bottom tip of India there as well. And the northernmost atoll, you can actually see, you can, it's the northernmost atoll is the closest point to India. So general ways of getting there, you either come through Colombo from Australia, or most people sort of go in via Singapore. That seems to be the most direct route, and everyone ends up at Mali, which is the capital of the Maldives. That's where their main international airport is. So, capital city. All right. So this is probably one of the most densely populated capital cities I've ever been to. They've run out of space on the ground, so as you can see, they've gone up. Okay, you see some big fields there. They love their football, and you can see it's surrounded by ocean. Okay, now what this photo doesn't show is the new Freedom Bridge, which connects this to Hull Mali, which is where the airport is. Previously, you used to have to get there via boat, but now there's a new bridge called the Friendship Bridge that opened mid last year, and now people can get across. They can get across by car to the airport, and it really sort of links these two together. Okay, so as you can see, based on that, an ambulance response is quite challenging. Okay, so how do you respond in this? This is a little bit of video I took just standing on the sidewalk on one of my visits. Road rules are kind of a guide, really. They're not really a rule. If you can get through, you can get through. Okay, and this isn't actually busy. This isn't peak hour. This is an average time. Okay. So along with that traffic, other challenges we actually have in this location is distance in the response. So as you can see, everything's broken up into atolls, and within all of those atolls are tiny little islands. And generally, they all have a main hospital and health centre, with the primary hospital and health centre located, or the tertiary hospital located here at Mali. Okay, so most of them do have a big health centre or hospital, and depending on the size of the island, will depend on how big the hospital is and whether or not they've got satellite health centres as well. But again, how do you manage a change and a response to emergency medicine when you've got such broad areas spread out and such little satellite islands everywhere where you're trying to make this change? So their overall response matrix focuses around sea ambulance, and this is controlled by the Maldivian National Defence Force, or MMDF, and sort of overseen by that Coast Guard, which sort of falls into that category. The sea ambulance goes between the various atolls and island atolls, and each service has their own sort of getting things across. On the land response, this is their general ambulance, Toyota HiAce response. You've got stretcher, area to sit, oxygen. Generally set up like a small movement ALS ambulance. And considering how tight those streets are, you can't actually get an ambulance much bigger than this down those streets, particularly in the capital cities and the big built-up cities that they do have. And we have been working as well in setting up a motorcycle response or scooter response as well within the capital and some of the cities, so that they can send a paramedic in first to assess and stabilise the patient by the scooter, and then they can send a transport unit through when they can get through the traffic to then pick the patient up and then take them to the hospital if that's required. And they also do have an aeromedical response as well. They've got two of these helicopters on loan from the Indian military. For how much longer, I'm not quite sure, but that is their aeromedical response. They've got one down on the southernmost tip and another one a little bit further up. And if it requires it, they will send rotary ring support as well. So EMS leadership development in the Maldives. Okay, so where I've been working in this space is after we went through the process of looking at ways they could improve their hospital-based ambulance service, I was approached to help them establish the National Ambulance Service within the country, because they actually don't have one. So this in itself set up a number of challenges, because there was no one there to actually lead the process and integrate this vital part of emergency medicine that we take for granted in our developed nations. When you go on a holiday to America or the US or Canada or the UK, you just expect the ambulance will turn up for you in a structured system to look after you. So things we had to do was effectively go back to square one, and we needed to actually develop the leaders that were going to lead this change as well, and get them to implement the transformational change that was going to be required to their national healthcare system to implement this. So one of the biggest things was there's no communication centre and no centralised call number. So let me put that in perspective. There's 26 different atolls with main hospitals, which means there's 26 different 911 if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or 000 if you're in the Southern Hemisphere here in Australia. So no centralised call number. So that was the first thing that we had to do. And not only was that needed to be established, but you then needed to establish the leadership structure and the management structure that was going to lead that development as well. We had to go through the training and education of staff and how that was going to be done. Looking at overall equipment, clinical governance, clinical leadership, funding, changes to health practice and health law. And that was probably one of the biggest aspects, was identifying where they are now, where they want to go, and what aspects of health law and practice, practitioner practice, would they need to modify so that they could incorporate paramedics or technicians into treating and treating patients. Currently, when we first started, there was only doctors and nurses and specific healthcare workers that had rights to actually do health practice on patients and physically touch and see and treat patients. So we had to lead within the Ministry of Health. We then had to provide education and development and information and justification for them, so they could then present this as part of the clinical leadership development of the National Ambulance Service to their health practice and law areas, so they could have that implemented into national law. So that was one of the first key aspects of actually getting this off the ground. And we were able to get that pushed through, so we could establish the levels of care that the new Maldivian National Ambulance Service was going to implement. We also had to work out how the executive leadership team was going to be developed. Who's going to run it? What's their experience? What do we need to do to help develop, inspire, and create the first of its kind in this nation. And how could we inspire them to then move through and develop the others? We also have to work out who's going to do the senior leadership team as we step down, and then middle management, frontline leaders, agency collaboration, all these key aspects that have to be built in using experience so that we could put all this together. Literally mind-blowing. It was no simple task. And these were just the basic steps that we needed to work forward in establishing this. And this led to a transformational change. And collaboration was and still is key locally. It's their ambulance service, it's their healthcare system, and it's vital that collaboration is made between all the hospital and health districts across every single atoll. Also collaboration with the military, because they provide and help run the sea ambulance. They also will need training for their staff as well. Working with the local airport and airports and harbour masters and other aspects like that, and working with the other healthcare centres, and really integrating what a National Ambulance Service is actually going to do for the hospital and health system. And internationally, working who we can collaborate with internationally to help them build this process and establish it well. And already with the Communication Centre, we were able to, I was able to collaborate with the International Emergency Academy of Emergency Dispatchers. And they were able to help with the development and rollout of their National Communication Centre for this. And by teaming up or collaborating with an expert in that field, they were then able to provide the skills and leadership development needed for that communication centre to develop from infancy to implementation, which they're in the process of doing right now. And it's bringing in those expert skill sets to help with this transformational change that will really make a difference in getting it off the ground and being implemented correctly, as opposed to this being built, sat there, gathering dust, and it never happens. So going through the right process with them so that they can implement this correctly, be sustainable, and grow as the system develops. And sustainability should be your mantra. You can't use a one-size-fits-all to solve your problems when you're dealing with developing nations, whether it be health, education, anything really. And that was the whole approach when it came to looking at ways we could modify and transform this process. So for me, I looked at what their current healthcare system had and worked out what we needed to do in relation to an ambulance service that could be implemented within their current model. And as their healthcare system grew, an ambulance service that could grow with that as well. So we have to look at what did they have? What do they need now? What lessons can be learnt from countries like Australia, the US, UK, and Canada, so that while when implementing this new service, they're not tripping over the same things we've tripped over the past few years in this process. And what does their team look like, and what is their vision? How will this integrate, grow, and develop within that healthcare system? And what is the short, medium, and long-term goals? And by working with the Ministry of Health and working with their identified people that were going to help lead and implement and make this change for their ambulance service, we were able to then start building the growth of EMS leadership and development within this nation. And most of all, we had to implement the human factor within this change process. And by getting these early leaders who are helping with the rollout and the development, we were able to actually begin the process, begin the transformational change, and really start to put forward this national ambulance service for this nation. And as a result of that, we started to come up with conceptual frameworks and organizational structures that helped implement it. So now let's just move to a completely different part of the world. We're going to leave crystal blue waters and white sand alone, and we're going to move out to the plainlands and mountains of Mongolia. And this is one of their national huts, and driving around Mongolia, and even on the outskirts of the capital city, you will see these traditional homes everywhere. So where is Mongolia? Well, effectively, it's in China. It's in between China and Russia. It sits right in the middle. It's landlocked, okay? And it is quite a large country, but it only has about 3.5 million population. This is the capital, As you can see, it is rather densely populated as well. I know it's not Mali, but if you compare like the density of Mali and then look at this as the capital of Mongolia, you can just see just how packed in everything is. And a lot of those houses you can see out and over the mountains. There'll be a whole collection of those GERs as well, which are out in there as well. So ambulance response, okay, it is massive. It is challenging, and any person that's worked in EMS will understand that time really makes a difference. So how do you respond? So this short video just gives you a quick idea on what it's actually like responding through this process. So this is mid-afternoon, okay? This is fairly light traffic, and this is about 40 minutes before peak hour. So this is us going to a seizure patient, and this is part of our bigger project that we're working with the Mongolian Ministry of Health and the World Health Organization as well. And
This is the harsh reality of ambulance services in Mongolia. We have a critically ill patient with a seizure right in the heart of the capital of Ulaanbaatar. The ambulance we've responded in has very limited equipment. We have limited airway access. The ambulance doctor has limited pharmacology, and all we can really do for our current patient is place him in the recovery position and hope we can reach our closest hospital as soon as possible. The patient's life hangs in the balance and he struggles to breathe. If our patient does go into a more serious state than he already is, we have no defibrillator, we have no advanced airway, and we have very limited time for getting the kind of action he needs to be. And time is probably one of our biggest issues that we have in the heart of the capital. Our ambulance took 15 minutes to travel the last 800 metres to get this patient into the emergency room.
And that was just one of the many issues. And so towards the end of that video, you can see just how tight and how hard getting through that traffic was. And quite frankly, it would have been quicker for the doctor and myself to unpack the patient out of the back of that ambulance and carry him by stretcher to the emergency department. I think we probably would have had him in and handed over, and there still would have been another 5 minutes before the ambulance would have arrived. So there are many of the challenges associated in that process, and I'll dig more into those in a minute, which really makes it challenging in sort of developing an EMS leadership development strategy in this particular location. Also, our Northern Hemisphere friends would understand what it's like to respond in a little bit of snow, and that's up near the Russian border. And a large part of Mongolia looks like that during the winter. Not uncommon for it to drop down to negative 40 to negative 50 degrees, add in a little bit of wind chill, and it can get up to negative 65, particularly on the Siberian northern border. And as you can see, the overall distance is massive as well. Now, speaking from experience, you can see up here in Deccan, which is just above the capital of Ulaanbaatar. I'll just get my little laser pointer going here for you. So here's the capital, and here's a town, a small city called Deccan. Now, from experience, I've done a helicopter evacuation from there, and from there to Ulaanbaatar, it's about a 45-minute flight. However, if you do that by road, it's 3.5 to 4 hours. So it is quite challenging. Okay, distance is massive. And probably the biggest issue is from Deccan to about the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar, you actually run pretty quick. But for that last drive coming to the capital, it almost takes an hour once you get on the outskirts just to get into the hospitals. And the hospitals are located in the dead centre of town as well. So local and land response, generally they use these ambulances and a ILOAD type, Hyundai type ambulance. And if you're a well-insured tourist, this is your response vehicle that they'll come and pick you up in. So how do you lead a system that's got no single dedicated number to call for an emergency? Just like the Maldives, so it doesn't have as many, it has a separate number for police, has a separate number for fire, has a separate number for disaster, has a separate number for ambulance. There's no interagency collaboration. There's silos absolutely everywhere, no formal structure, no educational framework, no actual ambulance service. It just sort of sits as a semi-umbrella in some call centres. There's no clinical governance. There's no chain of command, no positional role descriptions, no training in basic trauma management. And the closest emergency response, not sent to the most serious emergency, responses is ranked based on the order they come in. So if the sore toe comes in ahead of the cardiac arrest, then the sore toe gets treated first, and then once they free up, they'll send the ambulance on to the cardiac arrest. So these are the type of challenges that we're presented with in this environment as well. So the transformational change, again, collaboration was key in working with the Mongolian people with this as well, both locally, and that's where we integrated with the Ministry of Health, Fire and Rescue, which is referred to as the National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA, the military, and also local governments. Now, collaborating with all of those to work in unison to really help make this transformational change take place. In particularly, Ministry of Health, who look after the ambulance response, and NEMA were the two that we saw the biggest gaps and the biggest opportunity to really make a massive difference in pre-hospital response and EMS leadership change within Mongolia. Our rationale behind that is on our trip that we did in 2019 pre-COVID, we saw that NEMA got there sometimes before the ambulance arrived. And the NEMA officers were not actually trained to do any basic life support or looking at a North American example, things like your EMR program. They pretty much just sort of turned up and they waited, secured the car and put out fires and things like that, but just waited until ambulance arrived and the doctor got out and did their thing. Now, we identified a significant gap there, and through our international collaboration that we've got with some of the parties I'll discuss in a minute, we've identified a training and development program in which we will train the NEMA responders, as well as some of the people in the military as well, in a similar program. And with these, with NEMA turning up before an ambulance does, not only can they sort out the scene as they see it, they can also provide that initial BLS type care to the patient prior to ambulance arrival. And if we're dealing with trauma patients or we're dealing with hypothermic patients, that initial care could make a massive difference. They could stop the bleed with tourniquets. They could wrap the patient up to keep them warm. Little things like that, little simple things, so that when the ambulance doctor rocks up, instead of having one pair of hands there, now we might have 5 extra pair of hands that can help them, plus a patient that's been basically assessed and potentially packaged to some extent in a more stable manner than what was previously happening. And our international collaboration, again, we were able to team up with teams from Canada, the US, our Australian contingent. We've got the World Bank, WHO, and again, the group that I was able to work with in my Maldivian project with the Communications Centre, I presented the problems I was having with the Communications Centre and the dispatch and things like that here in Mongolia, and they've offered their services too, and have begun a review on what's currently in place and what we can do to modify, change, and develop. And again, sustainability comes back to my mantra, the one-size-fits-all model that I discussed earlier. What do they have? What do they need now? What lessons have already been learnt? And what does our team look like? And what is our vision? And by sitting back, listening to what they need and where they want to go, and getting key people involved in the clinical leadership, which can then help us push forward the EMS leadership and what that's going to look like. It's particularly collaborating in the NEMA and Ministry of Health space. We're really starting to get a breaking down of silos and an integration like they've never seen before. And this integration and growth can build into their current healthcare system and really modify what's currently in place and transform it into the vision that they have, which is to become more like a modern EMS system that we would take for granted here in a developed country, but developed in a way that suits their healthcare system, not developed off a model we use somewhere else. Their model, our models wouldn't fit in a health system like this. Their health system is unique to their current status, financial restraints, and other aspects like that. So they need to develop something that works within their healthcare system. And initially, they worked out short, medium, and long-term goals, looking at piloting in their smaller cities, and then slowly branching out to the other SOMs, which are states or provinces. If we're talking, if people want to sort of get a comparison, what a SOM means, and pushing it out, as a project said, from roadside to nationwide. And this whole process will eventually come together by implementing this throughout all aspects of the healthcare delivery. And their healthcare delivery system does come through Ministry of Health, goes through NEMA, and does go through their military as well. And keeping that human factor involved with this change process has been absolutely fundamentally key, and has definitely led to some short-term goals, which will be leading to some medium-term goals that we've already identified. And part of the transformational change was bringing the future leaders within this structure in Mongolia to Australia in February in 2020, just before we all got shut down and we couldn't move around due to COVID. We were able to bring the key people involved in that over here and show them our developed ambulance service and how it operates, our fire service and our rescue service and how they operate, and how everyone integrates together. Looking at our hospital and health system and how that integrates with all the other systems, so that we have that holistic model. And one thing that Mongolians are already doing, if we sort of take a little page out of the community paramedicine notebook at the moment, is that they have doctors on ambulances that respond, and not only do they perform basic emergency care, where they're really strong is in their primary healthcare delivery, and that primary healthcare is what is saving their current health system from being completely overrun by everyone turning up at the ED. So by implementing that primary healthcare model, it really helps their healthcare system to sort of keep its head above water. And in the redevelopment and reorganisation of this service, one thing I've put forward, particularly in the what do they have section, is that we need to enhance and keep that primary care health model, because it will really enable their ambulance service to deliver that really patient-centred and holistic approach to healthcare, and really keep that as a key aspect of their ambulance service. So it was great to sort of see that already in place. So how are we helping some of these changes take place in both Mongolia and in the Maldives? What are some of the things that works? Well, education has been absolutely key, and working in ways that we can enable growth, training, and experience across the board. So leading different ways in which we do educational change. It was snowing outside, so we decided to do a multicast on the inside and set up a fake car. And on these little tags here are written in Mongolian and English a particular problem that's wrong with the patient, and then they're going through a sort and sieve to identify which patients and which colours they need to be tagged in a multi-casualty situation. And implementing other aspects within their primary healthcare that we spoke about as well. And in the Maldives, working through new ways of delivering their pre-hospital care education, like taking the scenarios outside and incorporating training that they've learnt in different hospital and health centres. And this one was one of the earlier ones that we put together by actually incorporating scenarios instead of just sitting in classrooms and putting it in the more real-life environment. And then moving back into dealing with trauma management, sorting and sieving again, working together as a team, and putting forward some of this change. And this was an example of a multi-CAS training scenario in teaching the doctors that work on the ambulance the importance of identifying which patients can be saved now, a basic triage. And one thing that we identified in their current training was that they were, instead of sorting and sieving, they went in and they wanted to treat every patient and do a full, thorough assessment on each one before moving on to the next patient. So it was transforming the current educational process to incorporate that at a later stage in the assessment. So let's go in, let's sort, sieve, let's triage and tag. And then once we know what we've got, from dead to serious to not so serious to walking wounded, then we can move into our different triage areas. Then you can begin your next assessment, moving them out to other areas, etc., etc. So little things like that, just little slight tweaks to try and enhance what they're currently doing. And that's leading the educational change. And their future EMS leaders are helping push this change forward. And implementing these simple things for the drivers to carry on. These little lanyards that fold up that are written in Mongolian, as well as English. That was just for my benefit, so I knew what they were. Just teaching them different approaches to their patient care and other things like that. And this is just an example of the sort and sieve. It's Mongolian on one side, English on the other. And they are doing that in some of those scenarios like this that we showed before. Okay. And then defining how they deliver their educational pathway. This is an example of an LMS that was set up to help deliver the pathway for the nurse to paramedic program that we're doing with DFAT. And just changing the method from face-to-face, everyone in a classroom, to a bit of blended, bit of outside and things like that, like changing the paradigm of the traditional ways of doing things. And then sort of bringing it all together. This was our graduating cohort. And then working again with the doctors and the nurses within the Mongolian Health Centre, going through this process as well. And then helping with external companies that provided equipment which we donated to some of the more rural locations to help build their ambulance capacity and their equipment in doing their job, in things that we just take for granted. But I think in all of this, collaboration has been key as we help them build EMS leadership in these two countries that I've shown you today. Working together, taking away those silos. We've got the police working here. We've got the doctor working with the police officer so that they can be that extra pair of hands and working as one. We've got, in this photo, you can see we've got the military. We've got health. We've got NEMA, which is fire and rescue, all coming, and over in the corner here, we've got the police, all coming together as one to work together in maintaining this patient. Now, you can also see that I've got one of the people that is working with me on this project at the moment is Joe Acker. You would have heard him and some of his great colleagues talking about some stuff in this year's conference too. And he has been a wonderful asset in helping expand what we're doing with this program. But what you can't see with this photo is that initially NEMA responded, they stabilised this patient, and then the doctor arrived to then take the handover of the process as well. And then these are examples of other people that have helped throughout this international collaboration process. We've got Joe's all dressed up nice and formally. We've got Gary here, who's from the International Academy of Emergency Medical Dispatchers. This is Dr. Sue. She was part of the team that came to Australia. We're helping the future EMS leaders of Mongolia. She came to Australia in February. This is Dr. Arkasuk, who's in charge of emergency medicine in Mongolia. This is retired Fire Chief Darryl Reid that Joe recommended that I brought in to help with managing the areas of fire responses. Daryl's got a wealth of experience, an absolute gentleman and a pleasure to work with. So incorporating experts like Joe, Gary and Daryl to help with the program, to help enhance aspects where you don't have strong suits, can really enhance your project delivery, and building that team with everyone working off the same shared vision to move forward. And what we've found with other international agencies we're collaborating with is everyone has got that same vision, which is why it's working so well. And this is Dr. Hamish McLean. He's one of my PhD supervisors who works as expert in crisis communication. And again, continuing with the collaboration, university education programs to help delivering the work, and the overall organisations that have helped throughout this process in enabling this transformation to take place across these two nations. So I'll now be in a situation where I'll be able to answer some questions live, so it won't be a pre-recorded version of my talking head. And I'd be more than happy to answer any further questions about any aspects of what's been done in the program, what some of the future ambitions actually are. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and I look forward to answering some of your questions a little bit later on. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye for now.